It was well past midnight, and the moon hung low in a starless sky, bathing the empty highway in a ghostly glow. I had been driving for hours, my eyes heavy, my mind numb from the monotony of the road. My destination was still a good 2 hours away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off tonight, something eerie that I couldn't quite place. The radio had been my only companion since I left, playing a series of forgettable songs that merged into a single, droning melody. Suddenly, the signal cut out, replaced by a static hiss that made me jump. After fiddling with the dial, I gave up and switched it off, the sudden silence somehow louder than the static had been. A dense fog began to roll in, thick and suffocating, reducing my visibility to a few feet in front of the car. I slowed to a crawl, peering through the murk when a faint shape emerged from the mist. It was a figure, standing in the middle of the road, unmoving. My heart leapt to my throat as I slammed on the brakes, stopping just inches away. The figure was a woman, drenched from head to toe, her clothes clinging to her skin. She stared at me with hollow eyes, her mouth moving, but no sound came out. I rolled down the window, the cold air carrying a damp smell that filled the car. "Do you need help?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. She nodded slowly, then pointed down the road, back the way she had come. "He's there," she whispered, a voice so faint I could barely catch it. "He's waiting." Before I could ask who she meant, she vanished into the fog, leaving me chilled to the bone. Shaking, I started the car again and drove in the direction she had pointed, curiosity overtaking my fear. As I crept forward, the fog seemed to thicken, swirling around me like a living thing. Then, without warning, a figure darted across the road, too quick to see clearly, but unmistakably human. I stopped the car again, heart pounding, and scanned the road. Nothing. Just as I was about to drive on, the radio crackled back to life. A voice, deep and distorted, spoke directly into my soul. "Turn back now." The command was so authoritative, so menacing, that I almost obeyed without thinking. But something compelled me to continue. As I drove, the atmosphere grew oppressive, the air filled with whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Leave," they hissed, "go back." I pressed on, my hands sweaty on the wheel, every nerve in my body screaming for escape. Suddenly, the fog lifted, revealing a small, dilapidated house by the roadside. Its windows were dark, its structure sagging, as if it were about to collapse under the weight of its own despair. Despite everything in me urging me not to, I pulled over and got out of the car. The ground was wet and squelchy underfoot as I approached the house. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay, making me gag. I reached the front door, its paint peeling and wood rotting, and pushed it open with a trembling hand. Inside, the house was pitch black, the only light coming from the moonlight filtering through the broken windows. The air was cooler here, filled with the scent of old earth and something foul that I couldn't identify. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed something in the corner of the room. It was a figure, crouched and still. As I approached, it turned to face me, its features obscured by shadow. Then, with a suddenness that made me stagger backwards, it lunged at me, its face a mask of terror, mouth agape in a silent scream. I stumbled out of the house, my heart racing, and ran back to my car. Behind me, I could hear the sound of footsteps, rapid and light, like those of a child running. I didn't dare look back. I jumped into the car, slammed the door, and drove away as fast as I could. As I sped down the highway, the fog returned, denser than before. Shapes flitted through the mist, glimpses of faces twisted in anguish, hands reaching out to the car as if to pull me back. I drove blindly, tears streaming down my face, until finally the The fog thinned and the road cleared. The rest of the drive passed in a blur. When I finally reached my destination, the sun was rising, casting a pale light over everything. I sat in my car, shaking, unable to move, unable to understand what had happened. What had I seen? Who had been waiting in the fog? As the light grew stronger, I looked down at my hands, expecting to see them covered in grime from the house. Instead, they were clean, as if nothing had happened. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by fatigue and the long drive? But then, I noticed something on the passenger seat next to me. It was a small, tattered doll, its eyes missing, its clothes soaked. I had never seen it before. How had it gotten there? My mind raced, the events of the night replaying over and over. Was it over? Or had it only just begun? I sat there, staring at the doll, as dawn washed over the world outside. The warmth of the sun did nothing to ease the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I needed answers, and despite my fear, I knew I had to go back to where this nightmare had begun. Turning the car around, I drove with a purpose now. The landscapes whisked by, unobserved, as my mind replayed the events of the night. Each mile closer to the fog-shrouded road heightened my sense of dread, but I couldn't stop. I had to understand, even if it meant confronting whatever awaited me there. As I approached the same stretch of road, the sky, clear just moments ago, began to darken ominously. Clouds rolled in, thick and heavy, suffocating the light. The fog began to seep across the road again, crawling towards me like a living thing. My hands tightened on the wheel, my breathing shallow. I slowed as I neared the spot where I had first seen the woman. The atmosphere was thick, the air charged with a palpable tension. I could almost feel the eyes on me, hidden in the mist, watching, waiting. I stopped the car and got out, the air cool and damp against my skin. No sooner had I closed the door behind me than I heard it, a low moan, carried on the wind. It was coming from the direction of the old house. I followed the sound, my footsteps muffled by the fog. As I walked, the moan grew louder, more desperate. It was a sound of pure anguish, a sound that spoke of untold sorrows. The house loomed up out of the fog, more decrepit than I remembered. The door was ajar, swinging softly in the breeze as if inviting me in. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The darkness enveloped me, thick and oppressive. I fumbled for my phone, using it as a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the decayed grandeur of what must have once been a fine home. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, the floors covered with a thick layer of dust and debris. As I moved the light, something caught my eye: figures painted on the walls. They were crude, childlike drawings of people, their faces twisted in fear. I moved deeper into the house, drawn by the moaning which had now turned to sobs. I found the source in what appeared to be an old nursery. There, in the center of the room, sat the same woman I had seen on the road, rocking back and forth, clutching another doll identical to the one in my car. "She's lost," the woman whispered without looking up, "lost forever in the fog." "Who is lost? Who are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "My daughter," she replied, her voice breaking with each word. "She went into the fog and never returned. Now she wanders, lost and alone, forever searching for a way home." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "Because you are like her," she said, finally looking up at me. Her eyes were hollow, filled with a grief that was palpable. "You have seen the fog, felt its embrace." You will be drawn back again and again until you find her or become lost yourself. I backed away, the implications of her words sending a chill down my spine. I didn't want to believe her, couldn't accept that this nightmare would never end. I turned to leave, but stopped as she spoke again. "Take this," she said, holding out the doll. "It will guide you." Reluctantly, I took it, the fabric cold and damp under my fingers. As I left the house, the woman's sobs echoed behind me, a mournful sound that I couldn't escape. Back in the car, the doll sat on the passenger seat, its blank eyes seeming to stare into mine. I drove away, the fog enveloped. As the fog swallowed me whole, the shadows around me seemed to pulse with an eerie life. Each step I took was heavier than the last, as if the mist itself were trying to hold me back. The whispers had turned to distant cries, haunting calls that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My breath was ragged, my heart pounded in my chest, threatening to burst. Suddenly, the fog parted like a curtain, revealing a small clearing. In its center stood an ancient tree, its limbs gnarled and twisted, reaching toward the sky like the fingers of a desperate hand. Beneath the tree was a small figure, the little girl I had seen on the road. She was sitting, her back to me, humming a soft, melancholy tune. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking under the strain of fear. She turned slowly, her face obscured by the darkness. As she looked up, the moonlight fell upon her features, revealing eyes that were too old for her young face, filled with a sorrow no child should know. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice echoing strangely in the still air. "I came to find you," I replied, stepping closer. "To help you." "You can't help me," she said, standing up. Her movements were slow, deliberate. "No one can. I am lost, forever bound to this place." "What do you mean?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. "This is where it happened," she said, gesturing around her. "This is where I lost myself." As she spoke, the ground began to tremble, the air thickening with an oppressive dread. Shadows swirled around us, coalescing into forms that were human in shape but ghastly in appearance. They were the lost souls, I realized, trapped here just like her. The girl pointed to the tree. "They hung me from that branch," she whispered, her voice a mere breath. "And now I hang here, in between, unable to leave." The apparitions moved closer, their faces twisted in agony. "Help us," they moaned, their voices overlapping, creating a cacophony of despair. "I don't know how," I said, feeling helpless in the face of their suffering. "The doll," the girl said suddenly, pointing to the object still clutched in my hand. "It binds us here. It keeps us trapped." "Who gave this to me?" I asked, holding it out. "The woman in the house," she replied. "She is the keeper of the curse. She lures the living here to keep us company." I looked at the doll, its features suddenly malevolent in the moonlight. "What do I do with it?" I asked, desperate to end this nightmare. "Burn it," she said. "Burn it, and you free us all." Without hesitation, I pulled a lighter from my pocket, the one I kept for emergencies, and set the doll ablaze. The flames caught quickly, consuming the fabric and filling the air with an acrid smoke. The apparitions began to scream, a sound so piercing I had to cover my ears. But then, as the last of the doll turned to ash, the screams faded into sighs of relief. One by one, the shadows dissipated, leaving only the girl under the tree. She smiled, a sad, beautiful smile, then vanished like mist in the morning sun. The ground stopped shaking and the air cleared, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as if a great weight had been removed. I stood alone in the clearing, the burnt remains of the doll at my feet. I knew then that my journey was not over. The woman in the house had called me here, and now I had to find her, to confront her, to understand why she had done this. I walked back through the fog, which now seemed less menacing, more a veil than a barrier. As I approached the house, I felt a resolve settle over me. The door creaked open at my touch, welcoming me back into its decayed embrace. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old grief and secrets long kept. "Show yourself," I called into the darkness. "I know what you've done." Silence greeted me, heavy and expectant. Then a laugh, low and haunting, filled the house. "Very well," a voice said, its tone mocking. "Let us see if you truly understand." The floorboards groaned, and the woman appeared from the shadows. Her eyes were cold, her smile twisted. "You think you've saved them," she said, moving closer. "But the story doesn't end here, not for you." My heart pounded in my chest as she approached, her intentions unclear. The house seemed to close in around us, the walls whispering of horrors yet to come. I stood my ground, though every instinct screamed at me to flee. "You've only begun to uncover the truth," she hissed, her face inches from mine. "There's more to this curse, more for you to see." And with those chilling words, the ground beneath me gave way, and I was falling into darkness, into a story that had no end, a nightmare that clung to my soul, pulling me deeper into its terrifying depths. As I descended, her laughter echoed in my ears, a promise that this was only the beginning. The fall felt endless, as if I were being sucked into an abyss that stretched beyond the bounds of reality. My body was weightless, tumbling through darkness, each second stretching into eternity. The woman's laughter still echoed around me, a sinister soundtrack to my descent. Finally, with a jarring thud, I landed on something solid, yet the darkness remained complete, unyielding. Struggling to my feet, I fumbled for my phone, its flashlight a beacon in the oppressive gloom. The light revealed that I was in some sort of cellar, the walls damp and lined with ancient stones. The air was musty, filled with the scent of earth and decay. Shadows danced just beyond the reach of the light, as if mocking my efforts to penetrate their veil. I called out, hoping for an echo to give me a sense of the space, but there was no response, only the sound of my own voice, swallowed by the darkness. As I moved forward, my hand brushed against something cold and metallic. A chain hanging from the ceiling, it clinked softly with my touch, a lonely, hollow sound in the silence. The beam of my flashlight followed the chain upward, but the darkness above swallowed the light, giving no hint of its end. I tugged at the chain, half expecting something horrific to descend from the shadows, but there was only the sound of metal on metal echoing through the void. As I explored further, my light caught on something else, shapes huddled in the corners of the room. As I approached, the shapes resolved into figures, statues carved from some dark stone. They were grotesque, malformed creatures, their features twisted in expressions of agony and despair. Each one was different, yet all shared the same expression of eternal suffering. A chill ran down my spine as I realized these were not just statues, but prisoners of stone, their torment captured in unyielding granite. My heart pounded as I moved among them, their sightless eyes seeming to follow me, accusing, pleading. I wondered if I, too, was destined to join them, another lost soul forgotten in this dark place. I continued to move through the cellar, the statues a silent audience to my plight. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. Just as I was about to turn back, my light fell upon a door, its wood old and swollen with moisture. It stood slightly ajar, a sliver of even deeper darkness waiting beyond. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. It creaked ominously, the sound echoing around the room like a warning. Beyond lay a tunnel, the walls rough-hewn, the air even colder. I hesitated, the fear nearly overwhelming, but the thought of being trapped here forever drove me forward. The tunnel was narrow, forcing me to move slowly, the walls cold and clammy to the touch. I felt the oppressive weight of the earth above me, a constant reminder of the depth of my entrapment. The path twisted and turned, a labyrinthine descent into the heart of darkness. After what felt like hours, I emerged into a vast cavern. My light barely penetrated the gloom, but I could feel the enormity of the space around me. The air was thick with a fetid smell, the ground slick beneath my feet. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the center of the cavern, cloaked in shadows. It was the woman, the keeper of the curse. She turned to face me, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You have come far," she said, her voice echoing off the walls, "but you cannot escape your fate." "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the vast emptiness. "To keep the balance," she replied, stepping closer. "The darkness must be fed, or it will consume everything. You are part of the cycle now." I backed away, stumbling over the uneven ground. "I won't be part of your horrors," I shouted, desperation lending strength to my voice. She laughed, a sound that chilled me to my core. "You have no choice. You are already lost." In that moment, a surge of resolve filled me. I wouldn't let this nightmare be my end. I turned and ran, my only thought to escape the darkness that sought to claim me. I retraced my steps through the tunnel, my breath loud in my ears, the woman's laughter following me like a specter. I burst out of the cellar door, back into the house. The darkness of the night had lifted, dawn painting the sky with hues of pink and gold. I didn't stop to look back, I couldn't. I ran from the house, from the curse that had tried to claim me. As I reached the safety of my car, the sun broke over the horizon, its light burning away the last of the night's terrors. I drove away, leaving the house and its dark secrets behind me. As the distance grew, so did my relief. I was free, escaped from the darkness that had sought to envelop me. But the freedom came at a cost. The horrors I had witnessed, the shadows and the whispers, would forever be a part of me, a dark stain on my soul. I knew I would never truly escape them. They would lurk in the corners of my mind, waiting. As I drove into the rising sun, I realized the true horror wasn't being trapped in the darkness. It was knowing that part of it would always live within me, a silent reminder of the night when the darkness reached out and almost claimed another soul. And with this haunting realization, my story ends, back on the road, ever vigilant, ever haunted, forever changed.